the background and any background noise. Hopefully we'll keep it to a minimum, but it's always a possibility. A couple housekeeping things I wanted to note before I hand it over to Anne is for security purposes, the chat feature has been disabled, but we will have a Q&A session at the end, and you can submit a question at any time during the program. To ask a question, you just mouse over the Zoom window and you'll see several icons at the bottom. Click on the one marked Q&A and then type your question into the white box that pops up and press return. All submitted questions will queue up on our end, and then we'll address as many as possible during the Q&A session at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Anne Mulready, who is our board chair. Anne is going to give you a quick look at the past year's activities. And while she's speaking, I'm also going to run a slideshow on my screen just to highlight some of the things that she's going to mention. Hold on.
Yourself.
There you are. Hi.
Thank you, Nicole. On behalf of the board, we'd like to welcome you here this evening. We're really pleased to be able to have a virtual forum to highlight the critical work of the affiliate, which continued during this most extraordinary year. As Nicole mentioned, we want to highlight for you 10 examples of the affiliate's work this year, and we will have a slideshow to do that. But in addition to that slideshow, we also have participants from 4 lawsuits who are here to tell you about their experiences. And those experiences include getting 2 women's sports teams at Brown University reinstated after Brown had eliminated those teams in violation of a consent agreement that had preserved gender equity in sports on campus. We also have participants who are here to talk about filing a federal lawsuit that charged the Providence Police Department with racial discrimination against a police recruit who was involuntarily dismissed from the police academy. Another suit concerns getting very timely court orders to eliminate the witness and/or notary signature requirement for mail ballots for this past November's election, making it possible for many of us, or many more of us, to actually use mail ballots. And the last participant will be talking about obtaining releases of immigration detainees who are facing risk of severe illness or even death due to COVID, due to uncontrolled COVID at the Wyatt Detention Facility. So the slideshow reviews other important accomplishments that we will just quickly review. We had a suit against a local school, a school resource officer, and a municipality for the unlawful arrest of an African-American middle school honor student related to a minor infraction which occurred before school. We also had litigation restoring unemployment insurance benefits to people whose benefits were terminated without notice and in the midst of the pandemic. We had a lawsuit against a student that Barrington School Department dropped after we intervened. The school had actually sued the student who had successfully appealed an unlawful suspension. We also were successful in getting a federal court to strike down a state law which had banned vanity license plates that were found to be offensive to good taste. And our friend of the court brief submitted in the Superior Court case that upheld the constitutionality of the recently enacted Reproductive Privacy Act, which codified Roe v. Wade into state law. And lastly, we were successful in getting a gender ban on health insurance rated included in the FY21 budget. So hopefully we will see that approved at some point. And that covers, I think, our slideshow. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ann. I want to thank you all for attending our first and hopefully our last virtual annual meeting. Tip O'Neill famously said that all politics is local, but there's a corollary to that, and that is that all civil liberties is local as well. We understandably spend a lot of time worrying about what happens in Washington, D.C., and these last 4 years have certainly shown us why we need to do that. But the fact of the matter is that the real opportunity we have to exercise our rights comes down to what's happening at the state and local level, not the federal level. The Supreme Court can tell us that we have a right, but that doesn't mean state and local officials will allow us to exercise it. On the other hand, the Supreme Court can take away a right, but we have the ability to win it back at the state level. And I just want to briefly run through 3 examples that Ann briefly talked about. The first is abortion. The death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has legitimately raised fears about the continued vitality of Roe versus Wade. But Rhode Island's history shows that the Supreme Court's pronouncement of a right like that doesn't guarantee that we actually have it. Roe was decided in 1973, and for the next 25 years, the Rhode Island General Assembly did everything in its power to try to undermine Roe. They passed law after law that eroded the protections that Roe was supposed to provide. Laws like spousal notification, strict parental consent. Thanks to our great cooperating attorney, Lynette Labinger, organizations like Planned Parenthood, which was a plaintiff in many of these cases, we successfully challenged every one of those laws. But it was only because we were able to do that at the state level that Roe versus Wade actually meant something here in Rhode Island. Now things have taken an opposite turn. We're now all concerned the Supreme Court may take away that right. But last year, the General Assembly in a turnaround passed a law, the Reproductive Privacy Act, that codifies the principles of Roe versus Wade into state law. So regardless of what the US Supreme Court ends up doing, even if they end up overturning Roe versus Wade or significantly eroding it, here in Rhode Island, we are all protected because the state took action, we took action to make sure that this right will remain. A second issue, one that was also very near and dear to Justice Ginsburg's heart, is sex discrimination. For the second or third time now, the Supreme Court is considering a case this session that challenges the constitutionality of the federal Affordable Care Act. One of the provisions in the federal law bans health insurers from determining rates based on the gender of the insured person, a very important protection, particularly for women who, for a variety of reasons, are harmed the most by allowing this type of discrimination. Now, the reason that this federal provision is so important is because Rhode Island law actually allows insurers to engage in this discrimination. So a bad Supreme Court decision could leave Rhode Islanders open to this discriminatory treatment. As a result of that, we've been working very vigorously here in Rhode Island to get this state law repealed. And as Ann mentioned, I'm very happy to report, and I think it's thanks in large part to our policy associate, Hannah Stern, who's done a tremendous amount of work on this. Just last week, Governor Raimondo introduced an amendment to her budget that would, in fact, prevent insurers from discriminating on the basis of gender. So again, regardless of what the Supreme Court does, assuming the budget article pass, we will all be protected from this type of discrimination. The final example I want to give is voting rights, obviously an extremely important topic at any time, but more critical during this pandemic. Voting laws are state laws. There are very few federal laws governing the conduct of elections. So what a state does is very important. Here on Rhode Island, on the positive side, the legislature did one very good thing this summer. They passed a law allowing for early voting. So people did not have to all go to the polls on election day during social distancing concerns, but they could vote early, up to 20 days early at their local city or town hall. Again, that was because the state took action. On the other hand, the General Assembly refused to pass a law addressing a real problem with mail ballots. Under current state law, if you want to vote by mail ballot, you're required to have 2 people or a notary actually witness you sign the ballot envelope. And in the pandemic state, that's really a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea at any time, but especially during a pandemic. We filed a lawsuit because the state wouldn't take any action. We argued that it was unconstitutional to have this witness requirement. And the good thing that happened was both the Secretary of State and the Board of Elections agreed that it was a terrible idea, and they entered into a settlement agreement with us, waiving the requirement for this year's elections. Unfortunately, the Republican National Committee intervened, and they appealed the agreement all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And our lawsuit was actually the first in 8 lawsuits that the US Supreme Court considered this year, where it ruled in favor of voters and didn't throw out protections that had been won in the lower courts. And the reason we won is because the Supreme Court noted that this agreement to waive this requirement was with the approval of the state election officials. And it was for that reason the Supreme Court said it was okay. If a court had imposed it, if state officials had not agreed to it, we might have lost that case, and literally hundreds of thousands of people could have been disenfranchised. More importantly, our win also set a template for other states that were able to come to similar agreements in their election laws to allow more people to vote. So the point of these examples is just to emphasize that our rights at the end of the day are really not protected from up high. Instead, it happens much closer to the ground. Supreme Court decisions don't magically ensure us rights, and they don't take them away necessarily either. Right here at the state level, you and we can make a difference, regardless of which way the wind is blowing in Washington, D.C. So the message here is don't give up hope. Don't look to Washington for all the answers. Instead, realize the impact that you and the ACLU can have right here in our state, because that's ultimately where it counts. So with that, I'll take it back to you, Nicole.
Thanks so much, Steve. Next, we have Charlotte Abotsi with a spoken word piece to liven things up a little bit. Charlotte is an interdisciplinary writer, educator, and filmmaker who lives in Providence, Rhode Island. Please welcome Charlotte Abotsi.
Hello. Hi. Can you all hear me? Great. Thank you for having me. You said liven things up, but I am going to read a more serious poem. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure being here. It's a new one. It is called Another Black Person Has Been Murdered by Police, so it is in my best interest to feign self-care. I refuse to learn the names. All Black people do is know each other by name. Rakia just braided my hair. Ayana would have been as tall as her daddy. Philando paid them kids lunch fees. Philando paid. I've memorized all the names, somehow know them all. So many of us, famous and dead. So many of us rise with our arms up, awaiting both. So instead, tonight, I choose to slab cement over skin, lay with both my arms up. I think about all the ghosts I know too, and how I've run out of room in my closet, and how there is grief spilling from it. It's a mess in there. I'm so tired of all the dead people I know. I am dead tired of the knowing. I'm done learning the names. I'm exhausted by life and its refusal to stay mine. So instead, I fall into routine. As habitual as violence, I scrub, watch all of me pirouette down the drain. I mutilate a cucumber for each of my eyes. I am double cleansing the day away. All my me's are safe tonight. I saw an image of a knee on that man's neck, his Adam apple pulverized into juice, a concentration of the lungs. I saw an image of a knee on a man's neck, and now it is the neck of the dead. I rub recovery serum onto my own. I blend tree branch neck marks away. I choke myself to see how much I can withstand. Look how I glisten. Look at the glow of stretched out skin, blood rushing to its surface. I'm looking in the mirror and wishing myself a long stay. The smoke tells me otherwise. I'm looking in the mirror and wishing for a new me, a clean me, one without salt, copper. It was warfare when I saw the body decaying on the gravel, when the breath was stolen from the lungs. But bless the hands who nourish the skin and seek resolve. Bless the hands that paint circles into skin and refuse tomorrow's war. Bless the skin that peels, ready for vengeance. My new skin stay ready. My new skin wants all the smoke. So what's up? The inside of the fruit run down my eyes. So now I know I'm not the only thing to feel gutted. There are seeds of us in the asphalt. I'm going to sleep soft. Lactic acid for the skin turnover. I'm growing a new flesh. And at dawn, I will have new skin. Commercial cleanse clear. I've picked at all my teeth. They drip for war. Thank you.
Charlotte, that was amazing and so powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, earlier this year, Brown University cut several women's sports teams. The move was in direct violation of a decades-old consent agreement that was intended to preserve gender equity in the school's athletics programs. Our recent class action lawsuit successfully forced Brown to reinstate 2 of those teams. And here to share her experience is one of our plaintiffs in the case, Maddie McCarthy. Maddie was a Brown sophomore at the time of the suit and was instrumental in building a coalition of women athletes to assist in the ACLU's legal proceedings. So without further ado, please welcome Maddie.
I just want to thank the ACLU for inviting me, and I see my lawyers on tonight, Lynette Labinger, so thank you so much. And also a hello to my parents who are watching and have just been incredible throughout this entire experience. So I'm currently a Brown University sophomore. I'm studying biology and political science. I'm actually from Rhode Island, and I grew up skiing, which is odd for a state like this, but it was just something that my family really loved to do, and that I love to do. And I love sports since I was pretty young. And as I got older, I really wanted to come back to Rhode Island because I had gone to boarding school to be able to ski, which was a very normal thing in skiing, especially if you want to go ski in college and potentially get some scholarship money to do so. So naturally, I was really set on Brown. I went through a 2-year-long effort to get recruited. It was just a long haul to do it. And, my dream came true in March of 2019 during a gap year. I was admitted into Brown as their top ski recruit. And then had just a great first year. There were, I've always felt pretty well supported by the university, although had very little interaction with administration, had never seen our athletic director in person, but just loved my team and loved my teammates, and just wanted to do the best that I could every single day and practice, outside of athletic events. And then when we were actually racing, when the pandemic occurred, so we had gone home, we had been doing team meetings from home, everything seemed normal on May 28th, with, exams over, and I think kids were sort of relaxing and had this downtime. Brown called, gave 45-minute notice, and later had a 15-minute Zoom call 5-minute Zoom call saying that they were cutting 11 teams to pool their resources towards other sports, most of them being male. They reiterated, several times in the press to us that this was not fiscally motivated. And they began calling it the Excellence in Athletics Initiative, which really put a nail on the coffin, but really unexpected, out of nowhere. So I began to look along with some other of the kids affected. There were about 150. And we looked, and did an analysis of what teams were cut and why, because it was so unexpected. It was so shocking. And it was evident to me, at least, that this was gender motivated. And I say that because they had cut a bunch of women's teams and had cut a large men's team, being men's cross country and track and field. I had done some research into Cohen v. Brown University case, which Lynette was instrumental in the 1990s, and was just a landmark Title IX college sports case that Brown was held under for their discrimination towards women. So it was evident that they had a legacy of this, whether it was present or not. In the math, I knew that there were going to be some other factors that led to this, and I was really suspicious of that. So I reached out to Lynette, and there was nothing to be done, because at this point they had cut men's cross country and track, and there was no to make up for all of the women that they had cut. And then Brown's cross country and track team ran an incredibly successful public relations campaign, which included an expletive tweet from Malcolm Gladwell, a lot of really angry public figures that exposed the fact that Brown cut one of the most diverse teams on its campus. And they, under pressure from that, they reinstated men's cross country and track. And as I said before, they had cut them originally to make up for all of the women that they cut, so that they would be in compliance with this Cohen v. Brown consent decree. And then suddenly, when they did this, and they didn't expect to do this, of course, they became in gross violation of this Cohen v. Brown settlement. So I came back into contact with Lynette, and we created a great team of nearly 70 women affected by Brown's decision that became incredibly angry. And I think, it really lit the fire when they were taking teams away, suddenly had this really secretive process, and then we're just adding teams back because they were getting called out on sort of the stuff that was done. So our entire legal team, they dove wholeheartedly into this throughout the summer. Lynette worked with a team that I'd connected with early too, from Iowa, that had a history of winning and litigating Title IX college sports cases. And the case was eventually settled earlier this fall. And as part of that, we were able to get 2 of the 5 women's teams reinstated. We also ran probably what I'm most proud of was an attention-grabbing PR campaign. It was highlighted by an exposure of the Browns administration intent to kill the consent decree, which was exposed through emails that were obtained through the discovery process. And it was very clear that they wanted to have a disproportionate amount of male to female athletes. And I think just talking about the aspects of the case is really, it brings me to my closing thought, and just reflecting on this case, I think of one word, and that's intent. Whenever there's an intent from one party that yields some kind of injustice, you hope that there's an equal and opposite reaction coming from a place that is a very different intent, and that being the intent to do the right thing and overturn the other side. And that's what I like to think about when I try to make sense of this case and all that happened this summer. And that's, of course, in line with the ACLU's legacy of just being that opposing force, exemplified certainly in the highest way by the Rhode Island ACLU and Lynette. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Maddie. That was great. As Anne mentioned at the beginning of our program earlier this year, we filed a federal discrimination suit against the Providence Police Academy. One Black recruit, Michael Clark, was involuntarily dismissed after enduring months of harassment from his trainers. And our case here seeks to end these sorts of discriminatory training practices at the academy. Joining us this evening is Michael, who is our plaintiff in the case, and he's just going to share a bit about his experience. Welcome, Michael. Let me unmute you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank the ACLU for being the great protector of freedoms that you are. I thank this organization for having the courage to stand up for people like me. I thank you for deciding that you would take my case and help me seek justice for the discrimination I faced for both exercising my free speech rights and because of my race while at the academy. I believe that the fact you took my case helps to further the cause of all African Americans who had to endure unjust treatment. It is important to me that this mistreatment stops today. I know it was God who led me to you. In 2019, after being mistreated for 5 months at the Providence Police Academy and wrongfully dismissed 2 weeks before graduation, I was devastated. I felt like all my hopes and dreams were shattered. I felt like a mouse in the world. I felt completely defeated. After a couple of months of praying and meditating, through my faith in God, I was fortified. I was determined that I had to do something about what happened to me. I first went to the Human Rights Commission of Providence, Rhode Island, to bring a claim. I asked who might help me, seeing that I'm not a lawyer, and I was told one organization that may help with the matter was the Rhode Island ACLU. Within months, the ACLU not only took my case, but they formed a team of lawyers to diligently work on it. We have made tremendous progress up to this point. We are working on shining a light on this discrimination I faced and to make long-lasting change in the criminal justice system. I did earn my place in the Providence Academy. I didn't earn my place in the Providence Police Academy to be the poster child of such a cause. I earned my spot in the academy. I wanted to be a great police officer in Providence community and the community that I grew up in. I wanted to help, give back, and serve. Even though I was treated as I was, I'm still proud. I feel an obligation to seek justice, not only for the cruel discrimination I had to endure at the academy, but to seek justice for all the many African Americans whose lives, careers, and dreams were completely destroyed, merely because of the color of their skin and what they believed in. This whole cause is so much bigger than me, but I am glad that you have chosen to walk this path with me to achieve a society where skin color doesn't cause anyone to suffer. A society where people are not retaliated against for performing Christian rap videos or just employing the cops to not shoot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Next, we have Muggs Fogarty with another spoken word performance. Muggs is a writer, performer, and vocalist from Providence, Rhode Island. Please join me in welcoming Muggs Fogarty to your screen.
Hello. Thank you so much again for having me. Last year's event was so glorious and it's such a fond memory. And I was really excited to be invited back this year. I just want to say thank you to everyone at ACLU for all the work you do on this long and arduous road towards equity. It's so inspiring to just sit here and listen to the panelists so far. I'm just really moved. I was saying, to the staff before everybody logged on, how it feels like last year's event was yesterday, but also 10 years ago. And in that vein, I'm gonna read again the piece I shared from last year, and it's been such like a funny afternoon sitting with it again. and just how exploded and 10 times more relevant it somehow feels in the wake of the year I imagine we've all had. So thank you in advance for listening. I've got this cool notebook that just says cash on the front, which is funny because this is a pretty anti-capitalist piece of writing. Some ha-has in there. I am thankful. I am indignant. I work with language and all its nefarious loopholes. I consider the task of constructing language into law. I consider law, the odd shape of absence at its table, the controversy of freedom, the agony of governance, how impossible the task of ever working language back into itself to protect itself. I dream up another litany of faces. Silenced mouths killed in darkness, I claw through history, looking for the worth of those deaths. Deep down, I prefer lawlessness. I slough off that thought like wet skin. I think of all those ugly founding fathers. I think of the word amend. Say it over and over till the threads of it come loose. I am grateful and indignant. This tear is unmendable. We all have to reach back to the beginning, amend, amend, amend the wordy laws of capitalist, rapist, racists, and feigned freedom to feel freer. All my quiet life, I've loved a place called Free Speech Thursdays. That's the Providence Poetry Slam. Knowing most gathered there did so to escape a certain isolation, to learn how to articulate who they were and who they wanted to be, to break through the deep silence of just being, to be listened to be queer and out somewhere, to hate God or police or the rich, to say I was here, to write poems, to live a flirty queer lifestyle in a liberal city, to see yourself mirrored in the banned books, to kiss a librarian's hands, kiss the broken book's beloved spine. I am grateful, but I am not liberal like my city claims to be. I have some hatred in my bones. I don't want us all to just get along. Sometimes I want revenge for the gross centralization of power and resource, for the ravenous trajectory of white supremacists throughout history, for the joy that's been murdered out of the world by colonists and holy men, and the trumped up glory of war, and the ever-growing toxic systemic violence against women, the land, and working people. One of the most challenged books of 2019 contained LGBTQ content and characters. I want prisons razed to the ground. I want law to float away on the wind like dust, like the sound of someone shouting in the distance growing quiet. So I find it difficult to reflect or praise the right to say out loud where I place the blame for this ruin. So long ago, written in stone, but still I am grateful, thankful for this beautiful space we've made up on these little stages in these little quiet rooms. After all these long years, I am grateful for the human champions, for their ideas, for their books, for their work. Bless those who aim to protect these particular freedoms wholly as all the others. Bless them when all that remains of our heroes are words on such burnable paper. Cool. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Muggs. I'm really, really delighted that you folks agreed to do this for us. So clearly this was a big year for voting by mail ballot. Clearly, ordinarily, Rhode Island law requires people who vote by mail to have 2 witnesses or a notary sign their mail ballot envelope. our successful lawsuit led to a waiver of this law, allowing hundreds of thousands of Rhode Island voters to cast their ballots safely by mail. Joining us to talk about her experience is Mary Baker, an assistant professor of anthropology at Rhode Island College, who was one of our 3 named plaintiffs in this class action lawsuit. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. I really wanted to thank the ACLU and especially Simone Lieber and Stephen Brown, who worked with me on this case, and the other 2 plaintiffs. I am still sort of dumbstruck that it had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Never in my life did I think that would happen. I'm a scientist, and so I'm really committed to scientific knowledge and evidence-based information. And so when the report started coming out in January, February, and March, I was growing very, very concerned about the pandemic and the threat. And so I was grabbing all the information that I could. And it was really clear that this was a scary thing, that it wasn't just the flu. And so very early on, my husband and I were early subscribers to things like masks. I sewed over 200 masks that I just gave away to anybody who needed them, because early on, all of the evidence that I could find pointed to the benefits of mask wearing. And this was long before states were adopting them. We practice social distancing. I'm in a number of high risk categories. I'm overweight. I have apnea and asthma. And when I get asthma, it gets bad. And so I was very afraid. And so I stopped going to the store. I would only do curbside pickup. If we ate out, I would only go if they would put it in the car for me. My husband ended up doing all of the indoor shopping. We were early adherents to sanitizing everything. It turns out we probably didn't need to do that. We quarantined our mail. I stopped going anywhere very early on, except when my mom needed help. My mom is in her 80s, and so she's also in a high risk category. So it was critical to me that I would be safe, so that when I went to her, she would be safe as well. And so I had lots of fears. And in the primary, the state waived the need for notaries and witnesses, but that wasn't happening for the presidential election. And this was really scary to me. I did not want to go and vote in person because I live in a very, very rural area, in an area where there are lots of science deniers and COVID deniers. And I was afraid to go into a building where I couldn't be certain that it would be safe for me to touch things or breathe the air, or that other people would be socially distanced. And so that really scared me. Having to get a notary would have meant that we would have had to travel very far, and our bank was closed. And so we didn't know where we would be able to get a notary. And to invite 2 witnesses to our house meant breaking the sort of closed cohort of exposure. And I also didn't want to put other people at risk driving out to our home in the rural location where I work. So I was really grateful that the ACLU fought for our right to waive the need for notaries and witnesses so that I could vote safely, so that my friends could vote safely. I have friends that are recovering from cancer, some that have diabetes, some that have other high risk issues, and they were afraid too. And so I'm deeply, deeply grateful that I was able to vote. For me, this was one of the most important presidential elections in my lifetime. And it was so important to me to be able to vote and to do so safely. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Joining us now is attorney Jared Goldstein. Jared is a professor of law at Roger Williams University School of Law, and he served as an ACLU of Rhode Island cooperating attorney in at least 2 of our recent lawsuits on behalf of immigrant detainees at the Wyatt Detention Center. Thanks for joining us, Jared.
Thanks for inviting me. I really do appreciate it. You asked for me to talk about my experience working on the case, and I'll try to summarize it, briefly. Back in April, Steve asked me whether I was interested in and whether I had time to get involved in a case about the lack of COVID protection for immigrant detainees at the Wyatt. Of course, I'm not sure why Steve asked me, but I assume it was because I've been involved in a bunch of protest activities at the Wyatt. I was there with my family the night that the corrections officer at the Wyatt tried to drive his truck through the crowd, and then I was involved in some proposed legislation to end detention of immigrants at the Wyatt and to ban private prisons before the legislature got shut down because of COVID. So anyway, Steve asked me whether I was interested and if I had time to work on a case about the Wyatt. And of course I was interested, but I didn't really have time, but he convinced me to do it anyway. Luckily, I recruited my colleague, Debbie Gonzalez, who runs our immigration law clinic and is amazing, to be my co-counsel in the case. And so our client was our first client was an immigrant detainee at the Wyatt who had severe asthma. And we found two other clients there, other ICE detainees who were at high risk for COVID. And what we found out when we met with them was that the Wyatt was operating as business as usual. That is, the guards were coming and going. There was no social distancing. There were no protections for COVID. There were no masks. There was no hand sanitizers. It was just business as usual. And we thought that put our clients' lives at severe jeopardy. So we filed suit in federal court. The day before the hearing, we got the news that the Wyatt had had its first positive case of COVID. The hearing was then held before Judge Smith, who found that the detention at the Wyatt violated our client's constitutional rights. They have a right to detention under conditions that were objectively reasonable, and the conditions at the Wyatt did not meet that standard. And so he ordered the release of our clients, which was great. It was a tremendous victory for them, who got to be released from these very dangerous conditions. But it was also it was bittersweet, because the day that they were released, we learned that 9 detainees at the detention facility at the Wyatt had tested positive. By the next week, there were 15 positive tests among the detainees and 6 staff members. So after our first case, we realized that we needed to do more. We needed to file a class action on behalf of all of the immigrant detainees at the Wyatt. So with the help from National ACLU, we recruited a law firm, Morgan & Lewis, to help us on the case. And in May, we filed a class action that is a suit on behalf of every one of the immigrant detainees at the Wyatt, challenging the conditions of their detention. The court granted that motion and found that the Wyatt was operating in an unconstitutional manner, creating objectively unreasonable conditions of detention that put at risk the lives of every detainee at the Wyatt. And then starting in June, she started holding individual hearings for every one of the ICE detainees at the Wyatt. This was a massive case where we had a whole team of lawyers, maybe there were 8 or 10 of us, who argued the cases. We divided the cases among us. The government had their whole team of lawyers. It went on for weeks. She held, I think she's held 35 individual hearings for the detainees. She ordered the release of 17 of them. The government voluntarily released 10 other detainees. So, 27 of the immigrants who are held at the Wyatt have been released because of the lawsuit. She denied release to another 27, mostly because she found that the government had shown that they posed a risk to the community because of their criminal backgrounds. The government has also been deporting a lot of the people held at the Wyatt, so that as of right now, there are only 18 immigrant detainees being held in Rhode Island complete. That's the number, the total number of ICE detainees in Rhode Island. Because of the lawsuit, we were able to get so many of them freed. The government has tried to get the suit dismissed, but the court has found that the conditions at the Wyatt have not improved. In fact, since the pandemic has started, there have been 295 positive COVID cases among the detainees at the Wyatt and 76 positive cases among the staff at the Wyatt. So the case is still ongoing, even though there aren't many immigrant detainees there. Every one of them is entitled to a hearing, and we're still fighting to get all of them out as soon as we can. And the other positive benefit from the case is, although the Wyatt is still not doing enough, conditions there have significantly improved as a result of the lawsuit that we brought, and that that ACLU and all of the people, the big team that we have working on the case, have been fighting so hard for. So so thank you to Steve and to ACLU for giving me that the chance to work on this case. I know everybody who worked on it has felt it was just a tremendously important thing to fight for the lives of our clients, and we're happy to do it.
Thank you so much, Jared. For our final segment, Hannah Stern, our public policy associate, is going to share her screen so that we can show you a video that was pre-recorded by Bert Crenca, who could not join us live this evening. Bert is a performance artist and musician who is perhaps best known for being the co-founder of AS220, a nonprofit arts center in Providence, Rhode Island. And so without further ado, here we are. Thanks, Hannah. Let me unmute you. I don't know how that works.
Hello, my ACLU friends. Welcome to 3 Minutes with a Patriot. Inasmuch as our maligned outgoing president's accomplishments are numerous, let me mention a few. DT revived our democracy, greatest participation in an election in history. DT exposed the malignancy in our society. There is no longer any denying systemic racism or social inequity. DT, by virtue of his tweets, proved the existence of fake news. Unfortunately, in regards to him, it was all true. DT provided endless material for comedians and artists. I'm sure Biden has potential, although I'm not sure if he is capable of providing the same quality or quantity of material. DT reduced government by firing anyone in his administration that had any idea or knowledge of what they were doing. DT has been proactive on the environment, dismantling major climate and environmental policies, thus liberating nature to fend for itself. DT proved that with proper health care, even an aged, unhealthy, pathetic human being can survive a plague. DT single-handedly proved that our species is overrated. Most importantly, DT revived the comb-over. Realizing there's nothing left for him to do. We can all take comfort in knowing that this era of unprecedented accomplishment is over. Now let's analyze. Why has DT been so effective? Why has he accomplished so much in such a short time? It is because bad things happen quickly. Dismantling of policies, natural disasters, thoughtlessness take little time or effort. Good things happen slowly. Creation and implementation of policies, actions that are sustained with the intention of good for the many, thoughtfulness. These take time and effort. Let's learn from DT's effectiveness. It is critical that we are successful in uniting us as DT was in dividing us. We have survived the delirium tremors of the last 4 years. The good requires slow, methodic, sustained effort, compassion, and empathy. I wonder if we have what it takes. I certainly hope so.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to Bert, even though he's not live, but thank you, Bert. And thank you, Hannah. And sorry for the brief muting. That was my fault. Okay, so at this point, it's time for questions. I'd like to first introduce Megan Cachadorian. Officially, Megan's title is assistant to the director, but she outgrew that about 10 years ago. And she currently manages all of our legal intake in addition to many other parts of our work. Tonight, she's facilitating the Q&A. As a quick reminder before she takes over, to ask a question, just mouse over the Zoom video window and you'll see several icons at the bottom. Click on the one marked Q&A and then type your question into the white box that pops up and press return. All the questions submitted will queue up on our end. And then we're gonna address as many as we can. So with that, I'm gonna give you Megan.
Thanks, Nicole. And thank you everybody who is on the call as an attendee. I'm sorry that we can't be there together with everybody. I always like to see you all at this event. So hopefully next year we can get back to it. And I want to thank the panelists as well. It's been a really great evening. And so thank you all for agreeing to do this. And we do have some questions coming in. There are a number of questions, but I did also want to pass along that there are two, there are more than two. There are a few folks who wanted to just also extend their gratitude to Charlotte and to Muggs. Great praises coming in for your pieces. So I wanted to make sure that you knew about that as well.
Thank you so much. I did see it. Thank you, Claudia.
I saw it too. Thank you.
I'm great. I'm glad. So I forget who can see what and where and when. So we have a question from somebody, and they were just wondering why only 2 of the sports teams were reinstated. I don't know, Maddie, if that's not in your wheelhouse, we can maybe get Steve on there to try and suss that out.
Yeah, I can try and answer that. So from the beginning, this was really I like to think of it as a math equation because under the Cohen consent decree, Brown had to have a number of women and a number of men, and they had to be in proportion by, I think the differential was like 2.25%. And there were some conditions around that. And we were well aware and kind of surprised because Brown could just reinstate certain teams and like mess around with their numbers without having to fight legal battles, because they're continuing to fight a fraud case that's unrelated to this, but there were 2 fraud cases, and we thought, they're getting so much pressure, why wouldn't they just like reinstate and then find another way? And it almost went to trial, but we were able to settle with them, and that was part of the settlement. We felt as if it was too much of a risk to allow them to just like fix it by, having these, manipulating the numbers and finding something that would be acceptable in court and just succumbing to the pressure that we had put on them. I hope that answers it. It's a complex sort of issue and background, but I felt like it was just a major win for us and for our lawyers as well. Brown thinks that they won, but it's, I think it was more of just covering their sort of mistakes and inadequacies. So yes, that's really why there were only two.
Thanks, Maddie. Great. So thank you all. I see there's lots of questions coming in. We're gonna, like I said, try and get to as many as we can. We don't want to keep you too long. And we had some folks who were not able to join us, but wanted to send in questions as well. So we promised we would try and answer those questions if we had time. There's a question here about voting and our win this year. Will the victories that we had this year carry over for the next election? Will people have to go back to getting witnesses for mail ballots? Steve, can you talk to that, or?
Yeah, I'll take that. The answer is it depends on the issue. Early voting that the General Assembly enacted into law this summer is permanent until the General Assembly decides to repeal it at some point, which I certainly hope they will never do. Even though it was in response to the pandemic, it's the law now and will be available in the future. Our lawsuit, however, the mail ballot issue, was the decision dealt solely with this year, the fact that there was a pandemic, and that is what made the witness requirement unconstitutional. However, I do expect that there will be a very big push next legislative session to pass some comprehensive election law to repeal this witness requirement and also address a whole bunch of other issues that came up as a result of the pandemic. We saw all sorts of voting problems arise. So we're hoping for some comprehensive legislation to address these issues and make voting easier across the board for years to come.
Someone's wondering if that also includes voter ID. Sorry, Steve.
I'll let Hannah take that.
I can answer that. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Stern. I'm the policy associate at the ACLU of Rhode Island. I'm very happy to be with you all tonight. And I'm just going to echo what everyone else has said and say that I'm so grateful to the performers and to the plaintiffs and the attorneys who have graciously spent their Friday night with us. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Very quickly, just to address voter ID, I believe it was in 2011, Steve can verify that historical piece of that precise piece of information, that the Rhode Island General Assembly passed a voter ID law. We find them to be very onerous, and voter ID laws do tend to disenfranchise lower income voters, senior citizens, voters with disabilities, voters of color, because some of these demographics are less likely to have government issued IDs, and it just makes it harder for them to vote. So we have been involved in campaigns since that law was put in place, was enacted, to repeal it. We will submit it again this year. We'll keep fighting for it, and hopefully that piece of legislation will have its time in the upcoming sessions as people realize what a really onerous piece of law that is. So thanks.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. Nicole is wondering if we would be able to ask Bert if we could allow him to share.
Yes, absolutely. So we're recording this. We're going to actually post it on our YouTube channel. And I can ask Bert if he's okay with us also posting just his clip. I'm pretty sure he recorded it specifically for us. So I will ask him that. In either way, you might have to scroll through the whole thing. If not, but I don't see why that wouldn't be acceptable. So thank you. I saw that question. Yes.
Jared, there are a couple of questions for you if you're
Sure.
Sorry, you were hiding behind my box. I couldn't see.
Oh, yeah, sorry,
Um,
no, right here.
So we have some folks who are just wondering about, conditions currently at Wyatt in terms of numbers and, you know, also about the ACI, which I
Yeah.
know is kind of that wild card.
Yeah, Steve can talk more about the ACI. He knows more about it than,
Okay.
what's happening there. I mean, at Wyatt, there has still been a major outbreak. It's been primarily among the Marshals Service detainees, which aren't my clients. My clients are the immigrant detainees. We did have a client who tested positive this week. Conditions are, I would say are better. They're definitely better on paper, but as they testified to in court a couple of weeks ago, there is a requirement that guards wear masks, but they're not wearing it all the time. So, and the warden was asked at the hearing a couple of weeks ago whether what he would do if he sees someone without a mask, and he says, well, I would tell them to put it on. And the judge didn't like this answer because it suggested that it was just like a good idea, and not like a hard and fast rule. You have to wear masks when you're in the prison because, these are, tinderbox situation where, once the virus is in there, it can just spread, so quickly. So, there's a decent set of policies on paper, but following them has not been very strict at all. So that's why we still have this, continued spread of the virus at the Wyatt. I can tell you one thing, like as of today, there are 37 active cases of COVID among the detainees, and let me see, and 18 among the staff. So, it's still, a very dangerous situation there.
But being actively monitored, so we know what's going on.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. There is a question here, Steve, about the RPA and any other legal challenges to it that we might be aware of.
So the RPA is the Reproductive Privacy Act. And as I mentioned, it's now been in effect for more than a year. There was a court challenge filed to it, as Ann mentioned at the very beginning of the program. And a few months ago, a Superior Court judge ruled that the statute was constitutional. It was perfectly appropriate for the General Assembly to pass this protection. The decision has been appealed, and we plan on participating in the case as what's known as a friend of the court, just as we did in the lower court. And I'm very confident that this law will be upheld, and everybody's rights to this very important freedom will be protected.
Thank you. And I know that we are now over what we had initially allotted for, and we don't really want to keep you any longer. So unfortunately, I don't know that we're going to get to all of the questions, but we will, I think, maybe have time for one more. Hannah, there's someone here who is wondering, how to get involved. Obviously it's a little bit different now as it was in the past. And maybe if we could talk about what we're looking at, heading into 2021.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So very quickly, just to address how to get involved, I think that one of the biggest ways is just joining us with our advocacy efforts. We have on our website a really, really comprehensive set of outlines and instructions and guideposts for basically how do you do social advocacy and how do you advocate at the State House? How do you advocate in front of your city council? What does it mean to give testimony? How do you write it? What is the protocol for going to the State House and testifying? And how do you find out about bills that you might be interested in? That's a really long list, but I guess there's a lot of components to it. But we have a really comprehensive set of resources on our website that discuss all of this. And being involved and submitting testimony and providing commentary on bills is, I think, a lot easier and a lot more accessible than you might think it is. Anyone can give testimony, anyone can submit it. If you are a resident of your community and there's an issue that speaks to you and that you feel passionate about, your testimony is important. I mean, it's important regardless, but it's always going to be powerful, and it's going to be really important for our legislators and for the General Assembly to hear. So I would really encourage that people check that out. I'm also personally always happy to answer literally any questions you might have about that. If you email our office, I will always be happy to get back to you and work with you on that. So I'm more than happy to talk about that. I think in terms of what we're looking for next year, and Steve, please jump in if there's anything I'm missing, but I would say that probably the first thing that comes to mind, especially because we really don't know what the nature of the legislative session will look like, ensuring that all governmental processes, especially the processes that put our laws in place, are being conducted with the utmost amount of transparency and with the utmost opportunity for public input and for public, what is the word I'm looking for? I guess for public input really kind of sums it up, and to make sure that the public can interact with their legislature in the same way that they would be able to if the State House were to be fully open, like it is when there is not a global pandemic raging across our country and the globe. So I think that's one of the big concerns. Steve, if there's anything else that you would want to add.
Yeah, I think there definitely are a few issues that will be on everybody's radar. One that's been talked about a lot in the last week or two is marijuana legalization. And, we will be heavily involved in that fight. I mean, one of the things we will be particularly looking for is ensuring that social justice issues are addressed with any legalization of marijuana, making sure that the communities that have been most harmed by the war on drugs are not left out once marijuana is legalized. I think we'll also see a big push on racial justice issues generally, although it's unclear exactly what those will look like. We know there are attempts to reform the law enforcement officer Bill of Rights, but we're looking to other issues as well related to racial justice. But as Hannah said, I mean, everything is just so up in the air at this point. It's hard to really figure out what will be a big issue, what won't be a big issue, and how it's all going to work, how lobbyists, organizations like ours are going to be able to participate. So it's a lot of wait and see at this point.
Thanks, Steve. I think we're going to wrap it up now. If you had a question that was not answered, you can always feel free to reach out to our office if you have any questions, as Hannah mentioned, and we will be more than happy to answer that, give you any information you're looking for. So I would encourage you, if you have more questions, to reach out to us. And I'm going to send it over to Steve for some final words, and we can wrap this thing up.
Okay, again, thank you all. Thanks for staying here, listening to what I hope you thought, as I thought, were really great and inspiring stories. Some great artists, listening to them. This is really fantastic. I can't end without giving a pitch for the ACLU. I really encourage you to help us do all the work, the summary of which you've seen tonight. You can go to our website, riaclu.org, and there are buttons at the top for you to donate. If you're not a member of the ACLU, we encourage you to join. There's a join button right next to the donate button. This is how we are able to do as much as we can. You've just heard a sample. We have a docket of about 40 cases. Hannah can tell you that during a regular legislative session, we will lobby on more than 300 bills, and we're only able to do so much because of support from people like you. So we hope you'll allow us to continue doing that in 2021. It has to be a better year than 2020. So help us make it that way. Do you want to wrap it up, Nicole?
Sure. I just want to reiterate Steve's thanks to everybody for participating, and to all of our attendees. And I will send out, actually, I will send out a survey, if that's okay. You'll get one via email, because we want your feedback on how this went, because we've never done it before. Hopefully we will never have to do an annual meeting again virtually, but who knows? So thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.